So after a decade of telling stories in the MCU with the Infinity Saga, it was decided that the next big superhero concept to keep fans interested was going to be the multiverse. And, coincidentally, around the same time, the DCEU seemed to be making the exact same decision. Coincidentally. Honestly, on paper, it makes sense. The multiverse has been a popular concept that's been explored from many different angles for decades in comics, and stories heavily featuring it rank among some of the most iconic and beloved superhero stories of all time. But something's been lost in translation from the comics to the screen when it comes to this concept. There have been some hits, like No Way Home and Deadpool and Wolverine, but I'd say those were so popular because of the classic actors coming back to play the classic characters again, not so much because of the multiverse aspect to them. And even though a lot of people do seem to like Loki quite a bit, it doesn't actually focus on the multiverse aspect as much as it pretends to, as it explores Loki and the TVA itself more than any of the specific universes or variants that they spend a few minutes in or around. And as far as the DCEU, their attempt at multiverse-style storytelling was so poorly received, it helped kill the entire universe. For the most part, people just really aren't that interested in the multiverse, to the point where shows like South Park and even the MCU itself with Wolverine and Deadpool are starting to kind of make fun of the concept. But just when people are starting to give up on the multiverse as an interesting storytelling device, something comes around and seems to have warmed people up to the concept again. Invincible. So, how is just one cartoon show use the multiverse in a way that's engaging to people, while the entire multi-billion-dollar movie universes of the MCU and DCEU are struggling to get that going? Well, I've come up with 3 main reasons why Invincible is able to do the multiverse naturally and in a way that fans are receptive to, while other movie universes, and specifically the MCU, seem to be floundering and don't seem to understand the appeal of the source material. Number 1, and this is the most important one, there is no threat that Mark is going to be replaced with a multiversal variant of himself. In the MCU, it's seeming more and more like one of the main reasons they wanted to use the multiverse was so that if a beloved character dies, they can just reintroduce him with either the same or a new actor so fans can have that character back. This is one of the absolute worst ways to use the multiverse, as it removes all stakes from the story. We've already seen this done with Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, who was killed off in Logan. Though, I think they did it pretty well by making this version of Wolverine similar, but also different, than the classic Fox version. But it sets a worrying precedent that they would even think to go this route. We all know Robert Downey Jr. is returning as Dr. Doom, and the Russos have said that it will be due to some kind of multiversal element. Either a Tony Stark who is a Dr. Doom, or a Dr. Doom who looks like Tony Stark. Either way, we all know it's just a way to get people to be interested in going to see it because they miss the guy. We'll likely get Chris Evans back as some form of Captain America, or some new actor coming in to play an alternate version of T'Challa. You do this once, you can get away with it, but if they make it a habit, it starts to really bore and annoy the fans. We watch these stories to becoming emotionally invested in these characters, and nothing gets us more emotional than that character's death. The version of Tony Stark we loved is dead. Some other version is not going to have the same level of importance to us as the original did. And as much as I did like Deadpool and Wolverine, I'm also very bummed that it isn't our Wolverine we've been watching for decades, and instead is some totally new character who I now have to be sold on, instead of having all the feelings I had for from the classic movies. Now, we don't have any official confirmation that they're just planning to start bringing in these old characters again from different universes, so it's a bit hysterical of people to worry about it. But there's this feeling viewers have been having for a while, wondering, why should I care about any of this? They could just kill my favorite character off and replace them with some other version of them from another universe and act like nothing happened. Both huge fans of Loki and Wolverine have both already experienced this. Why wouldn't it be reasonable to assume that other characters will have this treatment as well? Though this does happen occasionally in comics, it doesn't usually happen with the major characters. And if it does, it's usually not for all that long, because it's usually not very well received. But if you're watching Invincible, you can enjoy the multiverse aspects of the show without having any of those worries. You know we're following Mark's journey, the Mark we know. There's just no thought that they could kill Mark or any of the characters off and just replace them with a doppelganger from another universe and expect you to care about this new character. The show/comic knows we are incredibly attached to these characters, and it understands that our feelings for one will not just be transplanted onto another just because they look the same. A variant is an entirely new character to a viewer. I don't feel the same way about the show Loki as I did about the one we'd been watching for a decade in the movies. And if Mark or Eve or anyone in the comics were killed off and they went out to find some other universe version to come to this universe, I wouldn't feel the same about them as well. The character I liked is dead. And now this is a whole new version with a totally different life. With the vibe Invincible gives off, we know for a fact that if Mark dies, it's over. There may be an infinite number of Mark Graysons out in the multiverse, but they're not him, the one we're watching and the one we're attached to. This feeling that fans get, whether it's warranted or not, that they may just bring back an actor like Robert Downey Jr. to play a different version of Tony Stark, or even a different actor to come in and play Tony Stark, just cheapens our main universe Tony Stark. But when you're talking about a show like Invincible, no one is talking about that because that would be absolutely asinine. The multiverse works really well as a way to play with differing versions of characters. It works horribly as a cheap breeding ground to replace lost versions of those characters. Reason number 2. The alternate universe marks actually tell us something about Invincible. The core of the story of Invincible is Mark's fear of becoming his father. Now, while we're watching, it's hard to believe this could actually ever happen. We know Mark's good at heart, and though he makes some pretty drastic mistakes, we don't believe he could really ever be that different than he is. But with the storytelling tool of the multiverse, we can see how different things would be if just a little bit was different. In the beginning of Season 2 of Invincible, we see a Mark very, very similar to our own, but he did side with his father and is cold and cruel. It's uncanny to see him like this, and makes us question whether our Mark is capable of this or if it's something completely unique to this universe. It makes us start to think about him differently, and that's the whole point of a multiverse. To see characters and worlds we're familiar with, but from angles that make us either appreciate our main hero more or question how well we actually know them. So what's different about this Mark? Was his mom less of an influence? Did his father tell him about his Viltrumite heritage from a younger age? Or could it be that Mark just made a different choice and our version was capable of being like this? To sound quite pretentious, how much is nature and how much is nurture? That's what it makes us start to question about him. According to Angstrom Levy, not the most impartial source of course, most Invincibles in other universes are tyrants, and he makes that point clear by bringing an army of the most psychotic and evil Mark Graysons he can find to cause horror on an apocalyptic scale across the world. Now, it's difficult to imagine that our Mark could be as psychotic as these other versions, but we see moments where Mark starts getting the types of feelings that could lead him down that path, either to thinking he's doing the right thing but goes too far, or just giving up all hope and becoming dangerous. But Angstrom actually does him a bit of a favor, because by seeing these other universe versions of himself and how bad they can get, now Mark knows to be even stricter on himself, and just how dangerous his powers can be unchecked. Meanwhile, the MCU tried a plot like this with Multiverse of Madness. We see 3 Doctor Stranges, one who's willing to kill America Chavez to escape at the beginning of the movie, one in a flashback who used the Darkhold to stop Thanos and inadvertently destroyed a universe, and one who went mad using the Darkhold to find a universe to be with Christine in, and wound up killing all life on his planet in an incursion and killing multiple Doctor Stranges across the multiverse because he'd gone completely insane. These 3 show us dark versions of Stranges from across the multiverse, which can be pretty cool, but they don't really tell us anything about our Strange. 2 of those Stranges, though, aren't different because they just followed a different path in life or made different choices. They're different because they were corrupted by the Darkhold to bring great disaster. This isn't a multiverse story because of that. It's a dark power is corruptive type story. And weirdly, we don't need these Stranges to see this. We see it perfectly well in Wanda. We know Wanda's good, but the Darkhold has corrupted her mind and driven her insane. We could cut out the multiverse aspect and this theme would still work just fine. The other Strange? We don't know a thing about. So it's really hard to judge how he's different from our Strange. Sure, we don't know a lot about the other Invincibles who invade, but on their appearance alone, we can imagine their stories very easily, and that's on purpose from the creators. We can see a Mark who aligned with the Viltrumite Empire, we can see a Mark taking on the role of his father, and we see other ones in costumes that can let us know the different kind of paths they took in life, based specifically on their costumes. The other problem is that in Invincible, the universes we do see with a Mark, we can see how similar they actually are to our own. So this is a Mark with just a few little differences. In Multiverse of Madness, the Illuminati universe is so different from ours that we can barely recognize they're Strange. Mordo is a hero, meaning events from Doctor Strange 1 played out entirely differently. The X-Men, Fantastic Four, and Inhumans all exist and are major players in this world. They have a robotic Iron Legion protecting the planet, the Avengers are retired, their technology is vastly superior. The movie wants us to see this universe and think about how our Strange could become like the one who was executed here, but we really can't. This universe is so different that we cannot just assume this Strange is any more similar to ours than anything else in this universe. And that's all cool. I'm a super continuity nerd. I like just different looks and worlds for the sake of it too, and I like cataloging them all and thinking about all the little details, but the theme they were trying to explore in this movie just falls apart. While in Invincible, it's very strong and very clear. And lastly, number 3, the alternate universe Marks actually look like Mark. Now, Multiverse of Madness at least had all the variants of Doctor Strange actually look the same, adding to the doppelganger effect of the multiverse. But this has not been how the multiverse is approached in other projects. In Loki, we get many alternate universe variants of Loki, some of which include a Loki who was taken by the TVA but escapes and declares a guerrilla war on them, a Loki who hid instead of confronting Thanos and went on to regret all the suffering it caused and lived in isolation, a Loki who killed his brother as a child, and a Loki who collected all the Infinity Stones and killed multiple Avengers. And they all look like this, and this. Now, besides the young Loki, none of these look like the Loki we know at all. Within the continuity of the show, where alternate universes are created from events branching off the main timeline and growing into their own realities, why would any of them look different at all? Shouldn't they all look exactly like Loki? Now, I actually quite liked classic Loki. I think the actor did an awesome job. But when we learned that events in his universe transpired very similarly to the MCU, and he just hid somewhere instead of confronting Thanos, that was hurt a little. I imagined he was from a universe much closer to the comics, a universe where the rules and characters would be so different that it would not follow the plot of the MCU. But apparently not. How much more impactful would these different lives these Lokis have led feel had they looked like our Loki? A Loki who'd beaten the Avengers and made his own Infinity Hammer? A Loki who was in war against a time-traveling super organization? These are interesting ideas, but because they have different actors play them, it's difficult to see our Loki in them and imagine how his life could have been different. In comics, multiversal variants rarely look any different. Why would they? Having Clark Kent look like Clark Kent across universes is how you know he's Clark Kent. But in the MCU, it seems like they're going to make this the norm. We've already got two totally different Reed Richards. And sure, you could just say that it's just like when actors get recasted within the MCU itself, but that doesn't work in the case of all these variant Lokis because they're actually interacting with each other. The only real reason to use different actors in a multiverse role is if they're from an actual separate continuity, like the alternate Spider-Man in No Way Home. Having the characters look like the version we know and love, but act totally different is half the fun of alternate universes. It's fun to watch an actor act, and watching them act like one person while playing drastically different versions of that character is a challenge that someone like Tom Hiddleston would have killed at. Imagine if during the Invincible War, all the different marks had vastly different physical traits, if they were all drawn to be played by different actors. If some were women and some had much different skin tones or facial features or anything like that, it would just be a meaningless arc. Who would even care to watch that? Might as well have an army of random characters attack instead. There's no reason to have these be invincibles. In Loki, he's supposed to be seeing what Lokis are like and being influenced by it to act differently. In Invincible, Mark is being forced to witness his greatest fear, himself turning into a tyrant and murderer like his father wanted him to be. In Invincible, this point is hammered home very, very well. In Loki, it can get lost in all the random zany looks. The only one we really got this with is President Loki, but that one was pretty much just a joke. But people will say it's different with actors than it is with drawings or cartoons, but that's bullshit. Shows have been doing the doppelganger thing forever, and with way lower budgets and technology than this show has. If in any other show featuring the multiverse, they just use random actors as the same character interacting with himself, we'd all be confused and probably annoyed. Why accept it in the MCU? Unless it's for a specific reason to use a different actor because of something specifically different about that universe, I cannot understand the benefit of doing this. And so there you go. 3 reasons Invincible's multiverse has been well received, while the movie's versions are kind of putting everyone to sleep. Now, there is one other multiverse-centered superhero movie that I'm sure a couple of you are yelling at me about right now, Spider-Verse. And yeah, they've been successful, but I don't know how much of that is actually due to the multiverse aspect, and how much of it is just due to good old-fashioned, well-written characters and a visually engaging art style. It's fun to see variants of familiar characters, but that movie isn't really telling the story of how the same person is different from each other, or even really how the worlds are different from each other. Really, each Spider-Person is a totally different character, is how they portray it in the first and second movie, but they do all have common themes that tie them together. All the major spider people have virtually nothing in common with each other. Now, I think that this will change if they ever get that third movie made, when we get to compare and contrast the 2 versions of Miles and how their worlds are different, and I'm quite interested to see that. And let me be honest, there are actually quite a few more ways I think Invincible and projects like Spider-Verse do the multiverse much better than their live-action counterparts, but I didn't want this video to be that long. So, if you'd like to see a part 2 of this crap, let me know below. I've got a lot more to yap about. If you'd like to never hear me say the word multiverse again, let me know below too. I won't listen, but I appreciate the engagement. Anyways, if you aren't subscribed, click more if you want to hear me blah blah about more random nerdy crap in the future, and until then, see ya later.